got to turn the lights down. You guys must be tired after, if it's finals week.
We could shoot for some kind of happy.
Pretty pictures are better than pretty words, right? So, as you can almost see, actually, how are we advancing this? Opportunity hides in plain sight. And it's kind of been an underlying theme for us that we only really articulated recently because of the arguments that were going on in our offices. We were doing a new website. And so this is the first time I've gathered together the threads of this argument. So if it doesn't hold together, I really want to know. This is an interactive experience. So this is kind of the way we see the world. We're not expecting it to be tidy, but we're expecting that if you just look a little differently, you can discover something else. And that's the way we've approached our work. We don't want everything to be beautiful. We don't expect the context to be beautiful. We accept cities for being messy places, and that's cool. We expect life as being messy. So I thought what I'd do is use some of the things that we've identified or tried to frame as opportunities in plain sight that we haven't taken advantage of, or they're just there for the taking. So we'll start with difference. So as good modern architects, we've all learned about how to blur the distinction between inside and outside. And what happened with us, so this is Julius Schulman's photo of the Kaufman House, if I get it right. Then we got a client who said, I really don't like California modern, and I want a modern house. And it's like, oh, great. So what happens when you're pushed to investigate that blurring of inside to outside, which was so important and remains important to a generation, many generations of architects? Well, you can use it by being on the inside and looking out and feeling like there's no distinction, but maybe you can also accentuate indoor-outdoor relationships by emphasizing what's inside and what's outside in a strange kind of way. So that was what this was about. So this is a Sobieski house. So what happens if function gets messed about? The table tennis table isn't outside, it's in the living room, which is what happens there. That you really got a series of rooms for a group of people, a family of 4, who see life as a kind of art. It's improvised art on a daily basis. They wanted the idea that they could change things. So the kind of rooms developed out of the idea, because it needed to be modest. Studios are not fancy places. So it's concrete floors, drywall wall, nothing particularly exciting. So we were inspired by take-out Chinese food boxes, which is where this comes from. So I guess I should just walk you through how it's being used today, which I doubt is how they're going to use it a year from now. That was an existing studio. This is a pool house that we built so they could watch this house get built. And then these are the white boxes. And these guys, which are clad in a burnt wood, which is a natural preservative by burning cedar. The Japanese use it a lot. They call it sugi, I think. These bars have services, closets and bathrooms. Green roofs where we could, photovoltaics. So how's it being used now? Pool house at the moment is a guest house again because they've moved into the main house. But their kids are growing, and I guess in a couple of years' time, one of them or 2 of them will move from the bedroom they share now and maybe use that room. This was designed as a studio but is currently full of junk. This is the master bedroom at the moment. This is a dining room but started out life as a family room. At the moment, this is really being used as a family room. This is the living room, and this is the kitchen with a little den upstairs. And there's the pool. So what you've got is what we call in Australia a battle axe lot, and what you guys call here a flag lot. And it's surrounded by hedges that sort of, if Jamie, the guy who owns the house, hasn't got his gardener to hack at them, they're usually about 16 foot high. So they've got a very secluded, wonderful compound setting. And the idea is that you move from all of these rooms. So that's the second part that flips it. So how do you make an indoor-outdoor connection that isn't about blurring the distinction between inside and outside? Circulation runs outside. Now that's not particularly new. Traditional Chinese houses do it. There was a movement in the 20s and actually a little before that in the States, and particularly in Pasadena where this house is, of the healthy lifestyle where people wanted to get fresh air, and the idea of moving outside to go inside was present in a lot of in-house designs. Turned up in Australia in an idealistic community called Eltham. But anyhow, so here's the deal. It's pretty simple. These white boxes have a door on each side, which slides. They have a vent above, and then they have a highlight window that draws air up and through for ventilation. We're talking hot, dry summers, not as hot as here, 90s and 100s. You need heating in the winter, but it's pretty mild winter. So now I've got to go through this a bit more, getting bored with this slide. So that's up the top of next to the kitchen. And if you look down, come down the stairs from there, you'll see another attempt at our investigation of very cheap materials, which we love, which is pegboard, and this is an illuminated ceiling. The kitchen beyond, you're just doing kind of a walking tour. The pool house, the pool, and the garden, and the den above. An outdoor kitchen, if you've got an indoor kitchen. And everybody needs an asador and a pizza oven. The living room, I love this man because he collects real art and he collects reproduction art, which was one of the things that we got really interested in, because in China, if you're not an authorized artist, you can do reproductions. And this is somebody's reproduction of a famous Chinese artist's work. And I've always been interested in this issue of what is authenticity. So that was part of how we hit it off. And this is a very beautiful dog. And in the house itself, there are installations, not necessarily where you expect to find them. This is the door to the bathroom. This is the door handle, which is just 3 plexi things that you can see the light through and grab. And inside, it's a riotous and much brighter red, completely floor, ceiling, everything, room. The lawn in the middle, I think they put in too much lawn. We fight about that, but that's always fun. And there's that sort of circulation path that everyone uses through the house, unless it's bad weather. One of those bar buildings that has the bathrooms, this is the master bath, opening off to the courtyard to the west. That dog got around. That's the master bedroom, opening up here, and on the other side to the garden, which you can see now in this one. And then coming back around to the lawn, around the studio, and then movies outside. Why not? And you can sort of see how the things collect. It's a fantastic party house, which I didn't purposely design a party house. But we went there to a gathering to fundraise for the Architecture Museum in LA, and there were people all over the place, and it was one of the best things I've experienced for work that I've done, where everybody's activity was framed. It was fun. I want to talk to you a little bit about the pool house where I said they lived before the main house was completed. It, like the main house, doesn't have air conditioning. We wanted to be responsible sustainably, and so did they. So we used a system called an earth tube, which is buried beneath the ground. Goes down 3 to 6 meters. In this case, it's using the old bomb shelter, because in California, people were worried during World War II that there would be a Japanese invasion. So these things turn up periodically in houses. For the house, the earth tubes run to a different place. But the deal is that you bring air in, fan assisted from one side of the yard. You take it underground where the air temperature is cooler. It cools the air, it brings it into the house. That way you can responsibly leave the doors open all of the time, which these people were prone to do and still do. And it doesn't matter. So they said last summer, which was their first summer in the house, that it was comfortable all through. And this is the pool house. And you say, well, why is the pool house different? Well, it's because we had an existing house, existing building, which was Anne Elizabeth's studio, which was a different genre of building. If we would have done one style of building onto that different genre of building, it would have looked like The Outsider. If we made another building that was a slightly in-between kind of approach, we collected everything as belonging and not having one thing feel awkward in the setting. In other words, to make what you have work well is equally important to make what you have look good. Am I making sense? You get more value out of honoring what's there as well as what you make. And sort of the views of it. And that's just a cellular polycarbonate with metal siding and drywall, and that's blackboard going around, and that wafer board stuff. None of it rocket science, and all of it combines to create something with an evocation bigger than the parts. Now we're going to talk about weight. Excuse me, I'll turn my page. So weight. Paul Williams was an architect in Los Angeles, and if you've flown into LAX, the theme building in the middle was designed by him. A lot of movie stars' houses were designed by him, and this YMCA that was designed in 1926 was designed by him. He is even more extraordinary than the donor of this lecture opportunity. He was the first African-American architect licensed east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi. He was the first AIA African-American member, and he was a prominent and excellent architect. What you're seeing him in is on the opening day of the YMCA that he designed in 1926. So now let's talk about the weight of cultural history when you're asked to come to a building, restore the building, and add to it. Let me give you a little background. 1926 is segregated America. YMCAs are separate for the African American community than for the community at large. They were the only place that African Americans were allowed to swim, because if they had a pool, it was a segregated pool. I mean, I've got to get you in the mindset of what a different time and what an incredible legacy is sitting in this building. So it's a famous architect with cultural roots in the African American community. It was funded partially through the African American community. There were people, you'll like this story, women from the East, strong African American women who made a fortune out of hair straightening products. And their goal was to give back to their community, and they funded a number of YMCAs across the country. In Los Angeles proper, there was a couple, I think 1 or 2 or 3 at most, YMCAs that were for the African American community, and there are only 2 extant now, and this is a National Historic Building on the register, and incredibly important to the legacy of the African American community in LA. Are you feeling like it's serious enough yet? I hope so. And it was here's the other part about weight. We look at old buildings, and we're looking for hooks to, I've got to think about the addition, which will come later in this discussion. So just think about what you see here. And what is there to build on when you have to add to this building as well as restore it? The restoring part was kind of easy. This is how it came to our client in 2009, I think it was. It was a mess. The upper story housing program had been abandoned. That housing served a big migration of African Americans from the South in the 20s and the 30s. And the social programs on the ground floor were only partially used. And this is what it looked like in its heyday. And it's a good, solid building in the Spanish colonial revival style. You must have a Spanish colonial revival style here too, right? We've restored the building. The only thing we couldn't do on the outside was the ashlar coursing. So we did do a stucco coat that gave it back some of its, base. But restoring is pretty straightforward. You look for the clues in the drawings, you look for the clues in the photographs, and you try and work out what is important for the integrity of the building. And we measured things, we got plaster molds made, we restored, look, this was the door opening, this is what it should have been. So all this got rebuilt out, replicated, and it's back together now. And if you want to add new systems into a building of this vintage, and you've got principal rooms on the ground floor, and you don't want to see conduits and ducts running through your ground floor, there's a strategy of introducing an interstitial floor, which is what this is. And all the pipes and conduits run here so that the ceiling below can be free of any kind of modern service routing. So downstairs, the ceiling is clean. Principal spaces were restored and cleaned up. Anything we added as if it was furniture. It was sitting within the space as a whole. This is all, for us, not difficult decisions. We restored the gym. This isn't quite, they needed to clean the railing, but the contractors are always sloppy, but they will get to it. This used to be the natatorium, which I told you is a pretty significant item in an African-American. Why? Because there weren't that many opportunities to go swimming in LA unless you went here, if you were black. So although they needed this for the housing program, to be a lounge space, the pool is encapsulated, it could always be restored, and the tiles were kept, and the line of the pool kept, and a sort of a narrative memory of swimming lanes used as a graphic, again, to divide a wall from a volume so that it doesn't belong to that volume. So the volume has some integrity still, even though it's serving a completely different purpose. Housing units were restored. Well, not really restored, extended, because a housing unit in 1926 doesn't come to the right kind of standards for what you need in well, no, we're not in 19, that was a big slip, in 2013, whatever it is. So they all doubled in size, and that meant that to take advantage of a grandfathering for parking, which is a long, complicated issue, the best use out of this property was to replace every unit that was removed. So we added another, I think in the end, 30 units new. So now we start to come to the real problem. How do you add to this thing? It's difficult. Like, you know that whatever you do, you're going to screw up. You know, there's so much weight in history here. Well, we did. So this is how we did, because we followed the rules. The rules said that if you had a historic building and you wanted to take advantage of historic tax credits, which are an interpretation of how the historic preservation guidelines are interpreted in the state of California by a bunch of people who need to get a new life, because they've stuck in one way of measuring how you can do things. We have to keep experimenting about different ways, and they need to have more opportunity for interpretation, and this is not the case. So what they wanted us to do was to keep whatever addition we did below the eave line of the principal volume. That meant you built over 2-story volume here, 3 stories, excuse me. There's the pool where it used to be. And you could build over the back piece as well. That would keep you below the eave line, but it didn't give you the number of units, so it meant the economy of the project was thwarted. This is an affordable housing project, so they also wanted at each opportunity to make as many housing units as they could, because it's supportive housing for kids coming out of foster care, for people who had, I'm going to say this incorrectly, who had difficulty living in the world without medication, that kind of deal. That was tactful, wasn't it? Okay, so we worked out if you do this, of course we can do that. Client's not happy, doesn't have enough units. We start talking about what it means structurally, and this is a masonry building. This wouldn't be a masonry building, because we don't build masonry cheaply in LA. But the seismic difference between the two meant that the cost of doing this was outrageous. So luckily, our client, who was an architect, said, guys, this is stupid. We'll give up on the tax credits. We will restore the building as faithfully as we can, which you saw how we went about it. We need another way to do this. And that's when we came up with this system, is just building on the back part of the lot. Now, we're still in the sort of structure of how you make this, keep the integrity of the old building. So in this, we have two program components. Program component one is this, through here, entered from 28th Street, and that's community programs, which are available to residents of the building but run independently. And then we have a second entry here to the housing that is on this floor, that's the natatorium that, with the pool, and now is the lounge, that uses this space and the upper floors, okay? And they work independently and need to for program reasons. So this was where the identity of this addition was going to begin. And what we did was we built higher than the eave line, not much, I think it's 5 or 6 feet. And there's a deck space here, which I think Paul Williams had anticipated you could put another floor on it sometime, but at that time there was no seismic code, so that was a whole different era. And that was the logical place if you wanted to be expedient to put mechanical equipment. And we said, hey, why don't we hang a truss in the light well? That means we can get the mechanical equipment to hang in the light well and across the roof, which is of the gymnasium, that wasn't a flat roof. And that way we can release this roof here as a social space. And so we cantilever also from that truss an arbor that focuses now what can become a social space between the new addition and the old building. So doing that, we made a key social space for the project, which links old and new, and reveals completely intact the existing building, including the back, and the fantastic portraits of African-American leadership through the years. These are medallions, which have this beautiful curly Q ornamentation around them. So this seems to me like legitimate historic preservation that honors the past. Now we get to the difficult bit. How do you add the really difficult bit of the weight? So remember, when you look at those buildings, what people conventionally look for is ornamental compatibility. And we said, that doesn't tell us anything strong about what that existing building was. Those buildings were masonry. They were heavy. If we do a light, ephemeral kind of cladding to our addition, we're going to show off the strength of the original while we make something distinctly different as the addition. And that was the route we took. And what you're looking at is punched screens. Could have been done laser cut, but we worked out there was some economy to punching it, and then the kind of thing that happens in our office. So this is feathering out this way so you can see views down to downtown. Started out that it turns out that you can, when you punch, for very little upcharge, and still much less than laser cutting, cut aluminum so that you have hanging chads, if any of you vote. And those hanging chads can introduce a second level of pattern. In this case, the second level of pattern is drawn from that ornament that I referenced around the medallions. And it was a key narrative for the community to understand why we didn't just copy the original building, which is, if you don't think about buildings in a different way, is the only logical conclusion you can come to is how you would go about adding to that building. So this was some of the tests. This is cardboard. This is fussing about whether it should be 30-degree angle, 25-degree angle, 35 angle. So you think you're crazy with your projects. It doesn't stop. You'll get out there. You'll do the same kind of craziness. What we found, which was an incredible thing, was how the pattern was ephemeral. At different times of day and different orientations, those hanging chads were visible or not. So the pattern came and went. So we got this added bonus of this kind of magic trick. And then in the evening, you look back over it and you can see now sort of the key components as I've set them up. The social space, the arbor that's really the top cord of the truss, the thin ephemeral skin of the building. This cantilevers over to get the final 2 rooms they want. The elevator's in there. The box behind is a dumb stucco box, dumb as dirt. And the really strategically expensive, I guess, strategy was this skin. All the rest of the money went into restoration, which is like a money pit. It's just like that Tom Hanks movie. Inversion. So we've talked about weight. Now we're going to talk about turning ideas about what the roles of things upside down. I'm probably going way too slow. Are we okay? We're okay.
All except for the guy in the back row that's snoring.
Oh, hey. Wake up. So I want to talk about a market rate project, which is a market, not a market rate, a marketplace project called Hancock Lofts. And if you wanted to put it into the sort of urban design category, it's transit-oriented development. And this is the components of it. This is its location. This is Santa Monica Boulevard. Really busy street. Lots of stores and clubs and restaurants along it. And kind of the social heart of the gay community in Los Angeles. And then housing, in multifamily housing, moving up the hills because this is an uphill slope here. We're just at the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains. And Hancock Corner was originally a GTE facility, and the city had bought it. And they wanted to redress a lack of parking for the businesses along the street because the parking was rolling into the residential streets, and which made for unpopular drivers, or parkers, I should say. So they bought it with some transit funds, and then they set out to find a developer team who would develop the project. Their first instinct was to try and get movie and entertainment. That fell through. And then they came to our development team, which was CIM Group with Koning Eizenberg, and said, we want you to go through a process with the community that looks at how we can build housing, retail, and parking. And we don't know what the proportions will be. And we'll determine what the price of the land is when we see what the community will bear, seeing they bought the land, technically, it's city land, and we'll go from there. So we went through a process with the community, who were very sustainably progressive. However, sustainably progressive at that point in time, and still in this point in time, the relationship between density and sustainability is not well understood. That the more you use the same infrastructure to support more housing and more amenity in the same place, you get more walkable streets because you can support more businesses. You also use the same infrastructure to provide for more housing or more space, so you're using your resources more effectively instead of going out to the suburbs. Can't get that across. So we go through a number of configurations, and we settle on this one here, which could easily have been 2 stories high. That's why I'm showing that red line. It's got 37 units of housing, and it's got retail at the bottom here. It's got a lot of parking. And community was really not happy with this being, I think, 6 stories in that version, even though the shadow from this did no one any harm because it was across the main boulevard street. But this is something we have to help with exchanges of information each time we go to a community process and get people more aware of what can happen. So here is the elephant in the room. And we had an argument at the office today, is it an elephant or a gorilla in the room? Is it a 500-pound gorilla or is it an elephant? Well, this looks like an elephant, but somebody told me it should be a gorilla. I like the elephant. And you can see what the elephant is. Look, I got next to no housing units, 11,000 square foot of space, which is zip in retail. That's not even one big box retail store. It's nothing. And 216 parking spaces because most of those are public parking. So how do I make something look like a building that's inhabited while I got to deal with this thing? Plus, I'm embarrassed because I'm putting cars on a place where we know what we want to do is reduce the number of car users. So, but all those things. At the same time, we've got a high water table. So the dream of putting all your cars underground, you can forget that. We could go one level of basement. Now I'm going into excruciating detail because I'm sharing the way I think, so you can push me on when it gets too boring. It's an uphill, odd-shaped site. That was fabulous. How do you fit something regular on that? It's a marketplace development. So the developer is going into this deal because he wants to sell condominiums. And whether we agree with him right or wrong, the real estate brokers and the market don't accept that market rate condominiums and affordable rental housing can share the same facility. Now this is something that's because it's still new. They are required in West Hollywood, but required in Santa Monica to include a percentage of affordable housing in every project. And it's still not standard enough for people to get used to the idea that poor people are okay. So we had that problem to get. So because we didn't want this group to feel ostracized, but we knew they had to be separate. Here, what else was in play? Parking for residential, for a sense of security, needs to be separate from public parking. These are just what the marketplace expects for your development to sell if a recession doesn't crash in on you, which is what happened here. And our objective always is we want to engage people in context. So that was active street front continuously, contribute to the geography of uphill neighborhood. You know, how do you transition? Build a sense of community for the residents in the development as well as to the street. Address the boulevard and the side street as different animals. And then again, so with this high water table, one level of parking below, we knew we had to go up to get the parking in. Okay? So you're beginning to see how our filters work. Our filters work, that's us looking, see? And we use all the dumb stuff that you guys think are really boring parameters as kind of jumping off points for looking for opportunities hiding in plain sight. They're kind of the fun bits that set up the problem. And by the way, that doesn't get you off the hook for this, right? You can't do this and say that you've done great architecture. I'm not saying that we do great. Yes, I will. We do great architecture, but we do it because you don't lose sight of this. Even with an interactive process with the community, it doesn't matter. The obligation remains the same. So you can't come here, you can't go to your office when you're out in the world and say it's good enough that I've done this, because it's not good enough. Got that? Was that rough enough? So just to get you guys a giggle, this is how we used to do things in the old days. This is a little hand-drawn sketch with Pantone markers. And this was the sort of design that evolved. We're talking about 2002, 2003 when we're drawing this. This is the entry to the public parking that goes below grade. This is the entry to the resident parking that goes up. This is the affordable housing, which if you organize in a certain way, they can have lovely little gardens by the street, and they feel like active participants. My parking is in here, and I have townhouses up here with big decks. Okay? And I'm going uphill, remember? So going uphill means I can connect this plaza, if I work it right, so it's kind of contributive to the idea of a hillside town, even though it's got cars in it. And for those of you who don't believe that plazas in hillside towns have cars in it, go to Italy. This is built, and this kind of shows you in more detail for those of you who still read plans. Please read plans. I love plans. They're such beautiful diagrams. I love plans and sections. It dates me terribly. So this is the key section. This is the one that organized it. So what happens is there's that public parking going for that other parking garage. Here is the residential parking coming up and over the housing. So yeah, we've seen it over stores, but no one worries about the vibration to the residential unit. So with a little sound separation stuff, these units come out and they're fabulous. They're as cool as these. Different, but they're cool. So there's the parking rolling up onto the roof. So you can actually park for your townhouse unit adjacent. And this is how it came out. This is the whooshy developer shot. And the parking is there, and so that wood piece here, which looks like a compositional element and sets up the balconies for these guys, is hiding the parking behind. So we've completely changed the balance of what the parking does. The parking is actually working for us to make the composition of the scheme. So it's inverted in terms of its role. Normally, we're spending all our time just accepting that parking has to do something very dumb. And we've got to either hide it by putting a skin in front of it, or just accept it and let it do its stuff. Now, I borrowed the apartment trick from Ted Smith in San Diego, who did it in a building that he did, where he brought the parking up and over, and I encourage stealing. So let's talk about the units that face the street. These are the flats, and these have sliding screens, which is great for sun, they face south, and is great for a sense of privacy. And this is January 2007, it seems. And at that time, we realized there could be some economy, because we talked the contractor into these sliding screens. Not the contractor, the developer. So we said, look, it'll be cheap. They'll build them off-site. They'll bring them in. We did a mock-up, had one done, and that's what was going to happen. Well, little did anyone know that the contractor was going to go under, and another contractor take over the project. And that guy thought it was cleverer to add the slats in place with scaffold on the building. So this is not made off-site, which would have been surely cheaper, but actually made on-site in the frames on the face of the building. Wacky to me. The building hit the market, I think it was 2008, whatever that good recession year was. They didn't sell the project, and they rented out the units. And they got ridiculously high rents, which doesn't seem fair. They should be penalized in some way for, being developers that hit the market at the wrong time, but they didn't. And this is evidence of West Hollywood. It's the only place in the country where two people wearing identical pink T-shirts, walking a dog each, could cross accidentally. It's a great community. So this is what it feels like from the inside in the flats, and the moderation the screen would give. And this is the courtyard where you enter those flats. And there's some other units tucked behind. So now we're sort of going to the side street, and you can see where those foothills were going up that I was talking about, running up here, the parking garage, and the affordable units here. So if I sort of zoom in, and then I sort of show you those units. So these were singles, and the city, a city not-for-profit organizes them so that they're only there for pegged income folk, and they've been really, really popular. Oh, that got squished, didn't it? Well, they're not as skinny as that seems to be, but those are the townhouse units, which help break down the scale as you move up the street. And they open onto the decks, and you can see the railing that covers the garage comes up and is the railing here. And then the planting hasn't got in because the vines are growing across here now, and there's some more planting. But there's the front doors to those units, and their parking spaces here. And you can see how it connects to the idea of a community behind. So although these people aren't using this space, it's sort of a visual open space within the hillside. And then back out to the street. So that's inversion. Strategy. Can anybody do this Rubik's Cube thing? Can somebody do it for long enough? It's like that something happens. Woo, what was that? Shit, oops. So I want to talk about those ideas that frame the way you think about something, but don't necessarily have an architectural result. They have an experiential result, but they're dealing with how things are organized mentally, what your mindset is. So if you look at something this way and all the blacks are aligned one way, you're really dealing with the same set of components but aligning the squares a different way. So this is an owner's program for Otis Booth Campus. The owner is Children's Institute. Children's Institute's mission is to work with children and families exposed to violence. So you can see where that brings them out of a service sector rather than out of a community center sector, right? So it's almost clinical. So these are therapy rooms. There's workspace, and the great diagram you've always get from clients is everything goes to reception. Now, the way this was organized in their mind was to do with how their staff did their work. Now, this has been a big shift, not just in this project, but in corporate America, that instead of focusing on what it is, the way you go about doing your task, which is a holdover from the machine era, basically. Because the idea was that if you do it most efficiently, least number of steps, all that stuff that made it easy for the worker to do their work, then you would have a happier worker and a more efficient worker. And people have discovered that that isn't what does it. What really helps is that the people working in an organization feel that they're connected to the mission that they do. And as we talked with these guys further who are on the way to reinventing themselves without us coming in the room, they wanted to do team assistance for the kids who came in so that it wasn't just the social worker, it was a social worker and they brought in the local pastor if they were at a local church or someone from the school. They wanted to have a team approach to the kids so that they weren't taking the kids out of their setting. They were trying to strengthen the way they would feel within their setting. And this was their work change as well. So we sort of talked with them and started breaking up their program. And, so there was wellness program, there was workspace program, and there was sort of this, community program, which was their way of sort of giving back and getting people to trust them in the community. So we said, you know what? If you start, we can do all the same relationships you would need, but let's take it as a social setting rather than as a service provider setting. That changes everything. Then the personality of this building for that kid walking in the door is a community center, not a clinic. And it changes the mindset of the people who work there because they're seeing, I don't show the workspace there, do I? Yeah, there it is in the middle. They have to go through different aspects of the community space to get around. That means they come in contact with the people they help, and that energizes people. Here we are in Los Angeles, where it's an underserved community, minorities. This is the fabulous building that they got us. Naturally, it's one of the most expedient commercial buildings we've come across, and it was split on 2 sites. And as I'll keep going, you can see it was pretty attractive. So this one became the preschool. This became the front door to the community center, which is the Otis Booth campus as a whole. This is inside. And this is the fabulous interior. I mean, this is not a place that has, wow, this is a charismatic industrial setting. I think Jorge drove me by those incredible glassy buildings by the river. Now that's a sexy, industrial building. This had only windows facing on one side, facing west, which is just the worst exposure in LA. And it had a pre-stressed roof with cars on top, so you couldn't put skylights in it. McDonald's is on over here, so you can't put, that's on the boundary line. So you have one side of light. We had to make it feel like the light moved in a long way to get the kind of energy and ambience we were after. So here's kind of what played out. The blue is the community spaces, and they kept expanding as we talked with these people. Once given the opportunity to think about how they could use their community programs, all sorts of things happened. We introduced a nutrition program. We've got a garden, an edible garden. We've got all sorts of stuff. But you can see these guys are the wellness program or the therapy units that don't have waiting rooms. You don't go to this place, sit in a waiting room, go and get your therapy. You hang out in the community center, and when you need to go and see someone, it's like going to a classroom or a meeting with somebody. So you normalize the activity of seeking help. And that makes a big difference to how kids will feel. So this is what that parking lot looks like now. We were on a tight budget, as you would expect. Why should it get any easier? The lobby as you come in. And this screen here surrounds what we call a curiosity box. And it was a device we introduced to start conversations between therapists and kids. So if you're coming for the first time, now there's plenty of people who come here, it's just a normal community center. But for the ones coming here for the first time, being introduced to a therapist, somebody has something to look at to start a conversation. So we're here, where's your house? Where's your apartment? So you can engage in a conversation to help break the ice. And then around there, and again, this is link your everyday life with your professional life. When our kids started elementary school, they did cootie catchers. Did you guys do cootie catchers? Yeah. So cootie catchers was in my mind, and so we did this little origami wall. And when they have their events, what's become very popular is to try and make the origami that's on the wall. We kind of liked the symbolism of this, that inside the curiosity box was a tech center to improve digital literacy and also to give more advanced programs in art and technology for the kids who didn't have access to computers in their own houses, which is more people than one would like to admit. In session, the art room, in session, and the big room, as we called it, which has the patio opening out to the side. So we cut whatever openings we already had from garage doors up to the ceiling. There was another seismic thing, we're in LA, so there was a limit on how much we could cut into that west-facing wall. Just to tell you, we think about sustainability, which for us is as integrated as structures. We don't do projects without thinking about sustainability. Where we can, we like to make it visible, but that's not always the case. But this was brownfield and all the other kind of things that it's just intelligent and necessary to do. I think it was a LEED Silver project. So I'm going to take you across the road to this building here, which is the preschool. And the cheapest way to add an elevator was not to cut through the existing building, but to add it to the outside. So that gave us an opportunity to do more. So it's a community marker. And it's clad also in polycarbonate, cellular polycarbonate. And what was great about this program, it has an edible garden. It has lift-up garage doors that allow the kids' classrooms to open out. And it encouraged CII to develop a different kind of program. They started out as a Head Start program. And as they got into it and saw the spaces and stuff, they'd been toying with a Reggio Emilio program. If any of you are educators or know anyone in education, it's an Italian early education philosophy, and it's much richer than your normal sort of academic idea of what a Head Start program is. And they're now experimenting in this space with how they can adapt a Reggio program for a tighter budget kind of operation. Because this is a neighborhood school, it's not a fancy pants school. Which brings me to the third teacher. So the first teacher is me. I'm standing up here, I'm instructing. This also comes from Reggio Emilio. The second teacher is the child or the classmate. It's learning from each other or learning to learn yourself. And the third one is the environment. No school district puts any credence in the environment as a contributor to education. But if you change your mindset and say that it does, which I believe it does, I believe that you find out things you might not even know, it's subliminal often. You have added one more opportunity of a different kind of learning experience to happen. Plus, I really believe that when we work with children, if you want them to take you seriously, you need to practice what you preach. If you say the environment is important, you should goddamn make sure it is important. So here's John Adams Middle School. It's a 1,000 kid school in Santa Monica, built over time, but mainly in the 50s, the 30s and the 50s. These great cross-ventilated buildings. Unfortunately, these had come to the end of their natural life. But the rest of the school had this great kind of vibe, except strange things had happened. Big expanses of open space here were underutilized, And this space here is the lunchtime space, was overutilized. So that, and it was concentrated because the vice principal wanted to keep his eye on everybody. So he was keeping whatever section of the school was allowed to eat lunch at that time in his sights. And I said, as we were presenting to the school, we've got to change this. It looks like a refugee camp. And he reported me to the superintendent because he thought I was talking about the ethnicity of the kids, which hadn't crossed my mind, but happened to be predominantly Hispanic. And it's just like, nobody should be treated like this. I hadn't processed that part. I didn't get scolded by the superintendent, but I am being scolded by the superintendent now for other reasons. We'll get to that. You know, finding things hiding in plain sight is not always the best idea. So you looked outside and then you look inside. For every right reason, a school district's teachers feel like they need to protect resources. So if you started to examine how they were using spaces, it turned out they were using an incredibly high proportion of spaces for administrative uses. That's all the red stuff. Whole classrooms had 2 people in them as an administrative space. Now they thought they needed 18 new classrooms. And we worked out as we went around that if we added a little piece, where am I? Down here, because we needed to make a secure entry, and we replaced these which were irretrievable and moved an art room here or there, we could actually just build 9 classrooms and use the money to do some other things. So that's what we did. But we did this in an interactive design process with parents who were really into it, and the district who had a sustainability hook, which was their mechanism for change. The school teachers were a little less enthusiastic because I think they were protecting what they knew they had rather than trying to aim for something that they weren't sure they were going to get. So I don't blame them, but it's a difficult position that we've put educators in, that their expectations are so low. So this is kind of how the budget was hierarchied. I won't go through it. There are 3 key components. I'll just go through them quickly. So I said, if you're going to say the environment is important, right, then landscape should be valued. And if you can introduce indigenous landscape to get kids familiar with what grew somewhere, that's an educational opportunity. They were refurbishing the playing fields. The college, which is over here, Santa Monica College, which is a 2-year college, they were refurbishing the playing fields so that they could use them, not with grass, but with artificial grass, because it was less water and all that kind of stuff. But when you have artificial grass, you can't take food onto it. And they're pretty protective of how it's used. So we designed, oh, that's what it looks like. So this is what you're saying is quality environment to kids. Active play on a playing field is great, but anything in between, asphalt. So we introduced this layer between, which meant on weekends when there were games at the school, parents and younger siblings could hang out. You could have a different place to hang out at lunchtime maybe, you know, if the vice principal would let you. There was shade, there was texture, there was the ability to actually learn to appreciate a tree because you see one. Oh, edible garden, which they had started already in another location. All this is about, you know, for urban kids, a new entry. Well, this is about not just the physical gestures that you make that suggest something is welcoming. This is the school now. It's kind of cool, except because of this whole security issue, you have to these days have administration on this side of a main gate so that you can, when you don't have your kids coming and going at the beginning and end of a day, that they have to pass through a security section. So we put that extra building there. So this is that extra piece of real estate. We need a gate here, and you need to come into the administration this way and go into the school that way when it's not beginning or end of the day. Took this admin space here, that relieved that administration space. We reconfigured that one, and we did this. So now when you come in and it's a much more exuberant experience. It comes to a parent space where you can hang out a lot of the minority families in this neighborhood, which are Hispanic, sometimes parents hang out during the day. Sometimes grandparents hang out during the day. And it made a way of making contact. And also parents who were just over-invested. You have parents like that, or you were a parent like that. They want to get involved with the school. So you want to create a sense that the whole family is welcome. And then instead of saying art is something we can't afford and really is dispensable, we put the art room where the administration is, so you see it straight in at the front gate. So this changes the whole dynamic of the energy, of the sense of people doing things, that things are valued, and we're really excited about it. And it's almost finished. This is kind of what it would look like. And this, although it looks like a rendering, is through Paul Miller in our office's window, dirty window actually, of his car, but it looks like a rendering. I mean, I've never seen a photograph look more like a rendering than this one. It's nearly done. Planting is delayed because the district thinks that indigenous plantings can't be done with a maintenance-free agenda, but they've not tried it. It's tough. And why not do something that's a little bit more than sensible? The new classrooms. So we talked about this third teacher stuff. This is one where there's actually an implicit learning opportunity that I can point to, and we'll see it. So we didn't want to use air conditioning. We wanted to cool these buildings that need cooling. Heating is provided another way. This is another variation on the earth tube deal. So the picture on this side is a cooling tower. So if you're in a hot, dry climate, you drape cool cloths up here. The hot air comes in, hits the cool cloths, the air cools, and what happens with cool air? Drops. So you've got a lesson in differential pressure that cool air drops, and you know hot air rises, right? This side's the inverse condition. You superheat something, you will induce a draft where the hot air will go up. So if you, this is not, I'm just showing you two principles. It's more towards that principle. So the one that we used is called the solar chimney, and that was the inspiration. It starts as a sketch, develops into a viable idea with great mechanical engineers. The air intake is here. There's a little photovoltaic that drives a fan, and so the air comes in here, it goes underground, comes up and through, and because this is facing south, sounds completely counterintuitive, and glass, it superheats, that induces the draft up and through. So now, could this not work perfectly? Possibly. But if we don't experiment with other systems, no one's going to tell me that what we're doing now is right. The dumb double-loaded corridor classroom is a bigger risk than taking a risk that we'll have to do something to shade that glass if this doesn't work. Right? You're not the end of the world. But everyone is risk averse. So this is the technical drawings. There's that big earth tube coming up out of the ground. A redesigned lunch space that has bleacher seating, expanded seating options, all in plain sight. Ho ho. View from the street, the other side of the street. And we're nearly there. The classrooms don't look all that scary, even though they have a solar chimney, and the light comes in quite beautifully. We spend a lot of time checking shade angles so you don't get direct sunlight in the classroom. And it's beginning, the bones are emerging. Last category of thing. These are community hero buildings. We had restored a park called Virginia Avenue Park and expanded it way back, and this picture was taken in 2009 when it was complete. And we came back for another round to add the Pico Branch Library. And you can be a hero anywhere with water, so I recommend it. And the park is really working. It was, we took, what did we have there? We had old warehouse buildings that were reconfigured for different kinds of programs. Has a teen center with an armature that they can add things to, although they chose to add it where you don't have the armature. They're teens. What can I say? We landscaped the park, we drew strong, we facilitated the farmers market that was very popular on Saturdays and still is. And we basically knitted the community together from the lower income neighborhood here to the gentrifying single family neighborhood here and opened the park up. So when we wanted to put a library in the park, which was asked for by the local community, where the hell do you put it? And just for the, because I thought you might need to know. So first of all, there's a phase where you work out if it's feasible to put it in the park. Then you go through this huge community process stuff. This thing, can't read the years, but you can see it takes a long time. We're in the ground now. The steel has just gone in. And I think this started in 2000 and whatever that date is, 6, 7? Over here? Can you read that? 9. 2009. So it's, we're 4 years. So we knew the park well. We knew where the problems were too. We got all this working great. The programs across were working well. We knew that this was a great picnic area. The community had very cleverly said, we don't want a field when we did the park that's big enough for organized soccer to take over, because otherwise you can't do the pickup game wherever you want. So they were smart people. And then this is where the farmers market, great on the weekends for events, but dead during the day. And starting to see a drift of the kind of drug dealing stuff that had happened before that we got rid of. So this looked like a very likely place to put a library. We went through this process with the community. They also told us that you can't take any of our lawn, which was fair enough, having gone to the trouble of opening this park up, north to south, and this route, don't take any open space away. And there's a fire lane here, which we needed. And so we convinced the library, which was tricky, to split off their community room to become part of a campus of programs and activities, which the library was one, and the community space that the library comes with. They control the programming, but the space could be across the fire lane. We made a little amphitheater here, and what the librarians were great about is, like us, they wanted resident interaction. They wanted the library to be open and the seating for where you could get bought food at the market to be right out their front door. The more you can get people to bump into it, the more muscle a building has to do things socially for you. But we also wanted the building to be muscly. Well, there's the plan for those older, more sophisticated people who like plants. And then the rendering sort of showing that we're starting to say, look, we want buildings for communities to be aspirational. We'd seen, and I should have got a picture of it and I forgot, in Bogota, Colombia even, a more extreme situation where the favelas have nothing, the government came in and put in these libraries. And they're mostly fantastic places. And they told us, again, we don't have to be original to see things hiding in plain sight, we just have to look somewhere else, that it was a way of raising a sense of pride in community. So we said, from now on, our buildings are going to be heroes in community settings. And this is the first of them. We'd been pretty polite working on small budgets until this one came along. So it has a sort of a muscly roof, but it's not a muscly roof that came about for no good reason, because we've been steeped in so much practicality for so long that we can't do that. To have something do one purpose is a waste. So this roof is organized so that there are skylights that balance the light coming from outside to do two things: reduce the glare inside and increase the visibility in, especially as these days with the glass assemblies, even when it's well shaded, the tinting of the glass makes it harder and harder to get that clear visibility in. So we've increased the chances of that happening. We know that it won't need electric lighting during the day because it'll be daylit. The model, the aspirational interior, and no sunlight touching the books. Thank God for those sun modeling programs, and let's hope they're right. And then the way it hooks inside to outside. Different kinds of seating. This is actually like a counter that you would get in a coffee shop that looks out to the playing field there. And the way the whole thing gives an identity for the library that extends from the community room, changes the personality of the fire lane, which still complies, still 14 feet, and then the library extending out into the landscape. So this is more on the tradition of the California modern house, to blur the distinction between inside and outside, especially in a situation where you can't take your books outside, right? There's a security issue. And sort of suggesting how it might feel, and knowing for sure that we'll now have programs when this is complete during the week that may happen out here on picnic tables. And that there's eyes on that activity, which is all good. So the final project, and this is the extra muscly community hero. This is a project which I've shown some of you already, which is a park in, called Park, and it's in Seattle. And the idea of this competition was that the AIA organized a competition called Urban Interventions. This is the, we were a finalist in that competition. It was a blind competition. And what they were trying to do was look at competing needs at the local community and tourist level. So if anyone's been to Seattle and the Seattle Center, that's where we are. And what we said, well, why don't we flip this? Generally what people do is they use the tourist stuff to make the big idea. You know, that's the Bilbao effect. You know, the really important cultural building. They had plenty of cultural buildings there, so they really didn't need another. We said, well, what if a community building and the landscape combined to be the heroic gesture? So that you build neighborhood and authenticity first, and people love authentic places. You build its tourist attraction by making it a better neighborhood. And that was the philosophy behind this approach. So it's located at the crest of the watershed, so that's one body of water, that's the other. There's a park on the water's edge here, there's a park on the water's edge here. This is about being at the crest of the hill. Not a huge crest, but a crest technically, nevertheless, for the watershed. And Broad Street runs through. Has anybody been to Seattle? Knows where I'm talking about? Okay, so I can't make it up. These are the kind of stuff that's already there. So there's a Space Needle, the Science Center. The Space Needle has a monorail that comes from downtown and ends up in the Experience Music Project, the Gary Project. The Gates Foundation is across the road, the Key Arena, a children's museum here, a Cholula Museum somewhere in there, the Science Center. You get the picture, right? And then here was the piece of land they wanted us to look at specifically and talk about how it could connect to everything else. And it was a stadium and a parking lot, and everything was very fragmented. And we said, you know what, we like the program of community uses. What do we do with this? First, we needed to say, look, let's make this one place, not a patchwork of places. So the idea of this fabric evolved. That fabric had to be not just sensible, but extraordinary, and we came up with this rolling landscape, remembering that we're on the crest of the hill, that the sensibility to us for Seattle was that people had their feet in their city, but their head was in the wilderness. That there was a real love of nature that you feel in Seattle. And it became opportunities to craft smaller spaces and bigger spaces in the landscape. But again, it's a little bit like the Children's Institute Otis Booth campus. The real deal was to change the mindset of how all the players thought about that opportunity, which is not necessarily doing any architecture or design. It's that the school that owns this and the city that owns that and the guy who's got the lease for the Space Needle and the people who run the Children's Museum and the people who run all these things, to feel that there was a vested interest in making something together. And this is increasingly the case in our cities. As land is at a premium, you've got to get lots of players to the table to make change. The site plan, So the first thing we kind of thought to do was to extend that monorail, so it was a neighborhood monorail. We didn't realize at the time, but there's a whole contingent of people who believe this should happen. That the monorail shouldn't just be a tourist thing, it should be extended to serve neighborhood. Create a landscape that is wild and groomed that runs through the site. And because we didn't quite have enough room to get enough wilderness, we made this sort of borrowed landscape so that the top of the stadium seating is a wilderness as well. And if I go through this, it will slowly go through the kind of components, which isn't fair to you because I've gone on too long, but you're going to be stuck. You're going to have to watch it. So it starts with the fountain court on that side. It hooks to the forest with the rolling terrain, which incorporates picnic terraces. Don't you like me reading for you? Because I don't think you can do it by yourself. It's Friday. And then the field, so that you could have the sports events that they had for the high school. You could also have the music events and stuff that they have often in Seattle in this location. Most people who come from Seattle tell you about some event they went to where they drank too much, but the music was fantastic, and it was there. And this landscape evolving into this community building with pool and community facilities, and I think we called it the pavilion. And then there was a transit hub and a rebalancing of the street on the other side. And there was music that went with this, but not all audio is heard the same way. Oh, I can just get to the next slide, never mind. So there is the thing, and as we were going through this, these were the kind of principles we were using. Rebalance streets, which is a not unusual thing, is like make them work better for pedestrians as well as for cars. This street moves very fast at the moment and doesn't need to. The monorail connections running across. See public space as continuous. So instead of locking up, instead of thinking that one thing began here and began there, get more ambiguities of space that could be used in different ways. Layer activities. So what you've got here is, what do you have? Basketball at the bottom, swimming pool further up, more gym equipment and stuff like that. This is all stuff that the high school needs and the community can use. And highlight history so that views really show off the Space Needle, even though they painted it to its original color, which is not a very nice color. It's actually prettier white. Encourage open-ended activities, which I kind of mentioned. Unlock event space. This was a walled facility, and we're saying you've got to make event space work so that it's safe to be in and usable even when it's not for an event. Otherwise, you don't get enough use out of the resource. And there's a lot of sustainable strategies around transportation and water management and energy production, which I won't go into. And then finally, the one to me that came out as kind of the hero of all of it was this idea of interlacing urban and wild, getting more wild back into the city. And that kind of gives you the overview of those community heroes. So what I've been doing, I guess, is trying to show you our path of how we invent new ideas. For this, the sort of suggestion is that if I have an ocean, I would invent a boat. For us, it may not come so much that way, but is more nursed along by more hints and stuff of what we see happening around us. And we kind of have this philosophy. The function of the imagination is not to make strange things settled, but to make settled things strange. And this comes from G.K. Chesterton. And G.K. Chesterton wrote really great murder mysteries. You have to forget the fascist part of his career and concentrate on the good. And if you read any good murder mystery, sets you up to expect one thing and find another. And to a certain extent, architecture is doing the same thing. It's trying to catch your imagination by providing opportunities that you'd never thought to think about, but are really there. Like that murder is always there, and it's not the person you thought it was. So look for new opportunities, the things that you see every day, and think, like people like Miss Marple, who isn't a GK Chesterton character, are good at doing it. So you don't have to be beautiful, you don't have to be young, you can be anything, you just have to learn to reframe what you see and then take that knowledge and test it. So thank you very much.